overshadowing being loyal to themselves and to their vision, right? And this then translates to saying, okay, how do we work on leadership components, not just skills, right, but really at a mindset level? So, for example, having a personal vision, networking so that we can build allies for one's career. How do we be more comfortable with negotiating for self? And so we found that it's in this dance between the inner work and developing these competencies that we've seen really women grow and thrive.
You as an organization need to be very, very aware of how you are coming across, and you have to live those values because it's not sustained if it's false, right? So that's what I would believe, that the character, your values, your culture, these are important. These are not soft skills. These are actually hard skills. And I think every organization needs to embody them now.
Hello and a warm welcome to a very special podcast series, Unusual Suspects. I'm your host, Gaurav Chaudhary. This is a series about unraveling stories of entrepreneurs, investors, professionals, and philanthropists, of course, who are disruptors, yet not in your face. Their disruptions have consistently delivered on the purpose and the mission they've embarked on. Their values are as strong as the mission. While they're ruthless in pursuing their ambition, they don't stray from being leaders who are not just admired for the vision and relentless pursuit, but also for how they're building an ecosystem of believers who consistently push the boundaries. In each episode, I speak to one such leader, talking to her or him or them about their businesses, lives, inspirations, interests, challenges, pivot moments and turning points, successes, failures, and of course, the little joys of life and work. It is as much about their personal life stories as about their entrepreneurial, professional, and philanthropic journeys. Unusual Suspect streams on Earshot.in, Spotify.com, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Moneycontrol.com, and a host of other podcast streaming platforms and directories. For this episode, I'm delighted to have Anuradha Prasad, the founder cum CEO of Indian Leaders for the Social Sector, or ILSS, and Archana Ramachandran, Chief Operating Officer, ILSS. ILSS is a Delhi-based non-profit which was established in 2017. It works to strengthen the leadership talent pool in the social sector. Welcome to Unusual Suspects, Anu and Archana. Delighted to have you on the show.
Thank you.
Delighted to be here, Gaurav.
Yeah, Anu, first to you. This is a basic question, but fundamental nonetheless. Why is it imperative, in your view, to encourage more women to assume leadership roles in India's social sector? What is it that women bring onto the table as leaders that it is absolutely important for the country to have more and more women leaders in the social sector, both from an effectiveness of programs as well as other areas? Anu?
Thanks, Gaurav. For me, really, the work we do and everything we do actually at ILSS, I think women's empowerment is really at the center of things. It's deeply personal to both Archana and me, because I think it's just the huge hidden potential of what it could achieve for economic growth in the country. If we just want to talk, data, it could have an impact of and I think there's a McKinsey report saying if we achieve, gender pay parity, we can achieve $700 million in economic growth. So just simply from this vantage point of economic growth and development, women play a key role. The impact, and this is well researched, well documented, that the impact of empowered women leads to healthier choices for the next generation. Women tend to pass forward all the advantages that they receive in terms of education, healthcare. I think it's also important, from the whole vantage point of being role models and for bringing more sort of discourse in inequality. And for ILSS, really, the social impact sector works on some of the most sort of complex problems in the frontiers of gender, nutrition, health, society. And we really represent social justice, economic justice, and bridging the inequalities. And how best to sort of represent it by even the social sector being represented perspective of women leaders. If you look at the Dasra report, while 57% of the social impact sector have women, entering it or at mid-level spaces, only 19% are making it really to the top. And so life is happening to a lot of women that is allowing them to, or forcing them to sort of drop out of the workforce. And so for us, it's really a way of paying it forward by double clicking on what it means to bring more and more women, creating that environment so that more women come back into the workforce or don't leave the workforce. It's good in every which way. It's good from a society, community vantage point. It's great from an economic vantage point. It's just great for the next generation to sort of have more opportunities. And it's really very, very almost proven to create, stronger communities, resilient communities if women are a part of the decision making or a part of the discourse.
Absolutely, very well put. Archana, would you like to weigh in with your views on this?
I think apart from economic development, and sometimes organizations also focus on this from it's good for the brand, etc. I think at a fundamental level, as a student of neuroscience, the fact that women's brains are wired differently than men, it just makes sense to be able to leverage both those types of leadership for us at an organization and at a country level.
Indeed, of course. Anu, there's also this question about why women actually, as Archana said, women are wired differently, and that is why they are able to spot and solve problems that are otherwise sometimes appear insurmountable. Anu, in your view, what makes women a potent force in leadership positions to tackle some of the most pressing social challenges? And we have quite a few in India to address those. Anu?
So Gaurav, I genuinely believe that women are wired differently in the sense of being better listeners. And I know that I could get into trouble for making a broad generalization, but I'm sure research can back me on this, but are much more collaborative, are much more community oriented. And these are all, as the famous Jim Collins calls it, these are all signs of level 5 leadership. They listen, they are collaborative, they're far more empathetic. And those are really important qualities to bring into any decision making. Also, if you are making a decision, you're making a decision for society, for community, for families. You have to bring in the voices that are closest to some of this. And so I definitely think that women bring in a perspective which is very welcome, a leadership perspective of listenability, of humility, of collaboration, of empathy, that are really important leadership qualities that I don't think get celebrated enough. Somehow we're always celebrating sort of the loudest voices, the people who speak the most, and there's never any celebration of the maybe the non-charismatic personality. You don't have to be sort of sucking all the oxygen in a room. You need to be the person who can take people along, be a team player, team builder. To create that safe space for every voice to be heard. These are important, but not enough celebrated qualities. And I think a lot of women bring this very effortlessly into their leadership styles and really need to be almost celebrated for what value they bring. So again, to reiterate, just compassion, empathy, listenability, humility, being able to be a team player. These are very, very important, but not enough celebrated qualities. And I think women do embody them more often than not.
Absolutely. Archana, Anu did talk about how women are actually not celebrated in the manner for the kind of value that they bring into problem solving and leadership skills in a variety of areas. What, however, is also some kind of a characteristic Indian problem is also the existence of the legacy of patriarchal structures, and which can sometimes get very rigid to smash. It is in this context, how, in your view, can Archana, women disrupt traditional patriarchal power structures? Because these are very deeply embedded. They have a long legacy issues and also deeply embedded in the social structures too. Can you illustrate some examples from the ILSS ecosystem, how we have enabled smashing these kind of silos and patriarchal structures and enabled more women to assume leadership roles very, very successfully? Archana?
Yeah, definitely, Gaurav. Several such examples. I think the first step is really to acknowledge that our workplaces are deeply entrenched in patriarchy. As Srilata Batliwala says in her book All About Power, that the power is not only the things that are visible, right? There's so many forms of invisible and hidden forms of power. And then these, what they do is that they are reproducing gender norms and other biases within families, which influence how we operate at work, how we operate at home, how we operate in the society. Um, for example, in the context of our emerging women's leadership program, in every cohort, we work with about 25 to 30 women, and these women have anywhere between 8 and 20 years of experience. When we look at their career, we'll see a maximum of 2 to 3 women where the family has followed the woman's career, right? So the unsaid norm, therefore, is that the woman will follow the man, which is a classic example of places, right? Now, what we've seen is that when we listen to the few cases where this has been possible, the answer is not to say, therefore, the man follow the woman, right? But can we get to the nuances of what really causes this unsaid rule or the default rule? And in the cases where things have been different, we've seen how they've had to have many conversations. For example, some families tried where they said, you know what, for certain years or certain decades, one person's career is going to take the lead, and then we're going to switch, etc. For some others, they've just had a conversation to say, hey, you know what, this is how it's going to be. Whereas in most cases, there's not even a conversation about it. And the default is that there is a man's career and then the woman's career follows the man's career, right? So what we've seen through our work in this is that the importance is in having that conversation. Because when we unpack lessons, we've seen that it's difficult or it's not easy, not just for the woman, but also for the man. Actually, in the cases where we've had men follow women on their careers, it's actually been harder for the man because people tend to view the man as, not having ambition or not taking career seriously. And so what does it take to really talk about this proactively and then create something together rather than to resort to the defaults, right? And so, of course, over the 5 cohorts we worked with, over the 118 women we worked with, the magic is in having the conversation, and then needle shifts in some places to a little bit, in some places more significantly, but that using your voice and having the conversation, I think, is the first step in acknowledging the patriarchy and not resorting to the default.
Yes, indeed, of course. The next corollary to that, and an obvious corollary, is that there are barriers, and there, as you alluded to it briefly, that there are barriers for women in achieving these leadership goals. But how do you think that these can be mitigated? The more importantly, it also requires a lot of institutional support. So it is not just about trying and propping up someone as a woman leader. It'll happen probably in 1 or 2 cases, but you need to have some kind of an institutional ecosystem for that to scale and take place more and make it more mainstream. How is ILSS trying to get around the root causes and trying to plug this critical leadership gap? Archana?
Thanks, Gaurav. You've said it, you've hit the nail on the head by saying that it's not just the woman, it's the institutions and the environments in which the women need to thrive. We think about it in broadly 2 sides. One is the inner work that we need to do on ourselves. And because in the context of women's leadership, what is often called the imposter syndrome happens, right? So this is the stories that we tell ourselves, the stories in our head. For several participants, This is what you've grown up hearing as young girls and young women. So, for example, many participants tell us that they were disproportionately appreciated and rewarded for being nice to others and not connecting with what they really want or what their own needs are, right? Now, how does this show up at work years later? Is that in the workspace, most women are struggling to advocate for themselves. They are doing good work, their performance management is reflecting that, but to be able to advocate for themselves, for their growth, has been hard. So, what we've seen, for example, in our program, is that to hold the space to be able to get these women to dream without any fear. So, I wanted to share a special part of our program where, in the residential springboard, where we bring women together at the start of this program. One part that almost leaves us teary-eyed every single time with every single cohort is when we ask women to think about their vision. And it gets emotional because for many women, they've not thought about themselves beyond their role as a wife, mother, daughter, employee, sibling, etc. Right? And then what we invite them to do is to think about what would you want for yourself, right? And then share it with others, because step one is to think about it for yourself, which many people haven't done. But the second important step, Gaurav, is what you shared, which is, have you communicated it to your people at home, your people at work? And we found that to be often the starting point, because in many cases that's not happened. And then when the idea hasn't even been explored, then where do we start, right? The second part is where we've seen there are areas in leadership development which are more contextually important for women to thrive in the workplace and beyond. um, so for example, in the book, How Women Rise, they talk about how don't be so focused on your job that you lose sight of your career. And I can't tell you, almost every participant in our program, we've seen this, right? They've had such a laser sharp focus on their job, which often rewards them in the short run. They have quick career wins in early stages. They're getting, they're really liked and respected by the management. And yet, for several of them, they feel stuck. They feel like the team loyalty or the organizational loyalty is almost overshadowing being loyal to themselves and to their vision, right? And this then translates to saying, okay, how do we work on leadership components, not just skills, right, but really at a mindset level? So, for example, having a personal vision, networking so that we can build allies for one's career. How do we be more comfortable with negotiating for self? And so we found that it's in this dance between the inner work and developing these competencies that we've seen really women grow and thrive.
Absolutely. And as you said, the social reforms actually starts at home, at the lowest common denominator. And and diversity, equity, and inclusion will have to begin at home before it gets translated into workplace as a very normalized mainstream activity, which is my next question to both of you, actually, is, while there's been a lot of talk about DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, how is ILSS enabling and nudging corporate entities in this direction and also trying plug this gap? Because regardless of all the effort and very genuine efforts that have taken place over the last several years, there still is a disproportionate representation of women leaders in organizations, large and small, across the corporate landscape. How is ILSS actually trying to solve this? First, Anu, and then Archana.
So Gaurav, I think the work we can do at ILSS is really amplify the stories of transformation that is happening with the women leaders. It can't be just some lip service you're giving or some token stuff you're doing. It has to be more deeper than that. And I actually also I'll be honest, I celebrate in the corporate world those leaders. And, today it's a digital world. You can very easily follow the leadership of various corporates and what they stand for. It's suddenly becoming much, much more relevant. I think corporate leaders have to realize that they live in the world of the millennials and the Gen Zs, and the way they think and the way they uh, approach society is something that they need to be very, very self-aware of. And there are some very, very woke, I would say, leaders who have been championing the cause of gender equity, championing the cause of returnship, bringing women back to. And I think even on LinkedIn, we celebrate them, we write about them, we talk about them, and this it always leads to a sense of almost like good comparisons, right? You're showing some people up for their forward thinking, their more evolved thinking. But I think at ILSS, we're really keen on putting out stories. We have a conference tomorrow on women's leadership, where we have leaders from across the sectors coming to be a part of the debate and dialogue of how women can be a part of the conversation, and how it's all about women's leadership. So I think our contribution really is, of course, in nurturing women leaders to find themselves and therefore find their role in the world. And like Archana said, the first thing is having a vision for yourself. That will really keep you going when everything else is sort of difficult. And life is difficult for a lot of women in the 30s and 40s. But it's also being a part of a scaffolding, being a part of an ecosystem of support, an enabling environment where you feel supported, you feel safe. So I think ILSS is really focused on building the knowledge, celebrating the champions, showcasing the journeys, and in that way playing our role.
Indeed. Archana, would you like to add to that?
I'll just add by sharing two lenses. One is what Anu started with, which is that today we are seeing that it's not equitable development versus economic development, but actually both. And I think that narrative I find super helpful for both corporate and social sectors, right? So it's not either or, but the idea is that in order to have a better India, we have to have economic growth, which will then keeping in mind what does it take to have equitable growth, right? So I think that not viewing them a as two opposing forces, but what does it take to hold the dichotomy? I think is a critical one, right? If we zoom in on this, Gaurav, my biggest learning in this has been that if we've not experienced it, can we speak less, invite the people for whom this is real, and listen to them? The challenge becomes when someone is, whether this is with women, whether this is with gender, or whether this is with religion, or whether this is with class, or whether this is with caste. I think it's very different when it's intellectual, when I've read about it, versus when I've lived it, right? And so I think for any DEI, more so in the context of women, but I think it's equally applicable to any work that we want to do with communities that are marginalized. Can we bring the right people into the room and be truly willing to listen to them? I think is the best thing that anyone can do, whether it's in the corporate sector or the social sector.
Absolutely. And Anu, what are the traits that need to be unpacked in the social sector to build a more egalitarian workspace? Because that seems to be a crying necessity at this point in time. Anu?
I mean, I wouldn't just say social sector. I think in any sector, you need to unpack and celebrate those qualities that truly build institutions that are resilient, that are sustainable, that are equitable, that the right kind of institutions. And for that, I think, there is enough research to say that the best kind of leaders are those that embody certain values. Their values are in alignment with their work. There is an orientation towards a certain culture of bringing people together, of taking teams along. the word toxic culture is, it's not come out of nowhere. It's come from, from an idea of, this whole narrative of the business of business is business is doesn't resonate anymore. It just can't, right? So even if you track the journey of some of the best institutions over 20, 30, 40 years, the thing that you will see is the values, their alignment, and what were they celebrating. I started my career at American Express, and it's a very, very old organization that has very strong values around around their leadership and around just the way they come, the way they present themselves. They have those blue box values. I still remember them because they're so almost like timeless and sort of true, and they will hold true for centuries. So I think the values of compassion, empathy, taking people along, listening, these are timeless values of having a orientation to bring to listen to all the different voices. And there's enough data actually to say that if decision making comes through a process where you hear diverse voices, 25% of the time you arrive at better decisions. So there's data around a lot of what I'm saying. It's nothing new, but it needs to be double clicked. It needs to be celebrated. And it needs to be the culture for today and tomorrow. And I actually honestly believe that with the millennials coming into the workforce and the Gen Zs, some of this adoption will happen because they live in a hyper-connected world. They know more. A lot more is available to them. And so there is, you as an organization need to be very, very aware of how you are coming across, and you have to live those values because it's not sustained if it's false, right? So that's what I would believe, that the your character, your values, your culture, these are important. These are not soft skills. These are actually hard skills. And I think every organization needs to embody them now.
Absolutely, indeed. Finally, Archana, what role is ILSS playing in capacity building and upskilling for emerging women leaders in this sector? It would be great if you could share some success stories, Archana.
Sure, Gaurav. The first is I'll go back to our choice of picking emerging women leaders, and this goes to what Anu shared, that everywhere women need focus on leadership development. However, we found that for women in 30s and 40s, there was just too much of life going on. And therefore, when we look at our success stories also, it's reflected in what these women are navigating when they have so much going on. So, for example, the first anchor that we look at is, of course, with workplace and career. And because we've now gotten them to dream without any fear, and to be able to share their ambition with people, it's very interesting that when we go back, when we've spoken to alumni 6 months later, and we do this as a routine exercise, many of them talk to us about how they've had changes in pay, they've had a change in role and responsibility. Some of them have made a brave decision to switch organizations. In some cases, they've stepped back to say, hey, I want to upskill myself, get a formal education, coaching. And when we unpack this, what we see is that it's actually the lens shift to be able to dream big, to talk about, hey, here's where I am, here's what I want to go. And then the magic has happened because no one had ever questioned their commitment to learning and growing. But then when they were able to articulate the ambition for themselves and make visible their ambition, the changes were happening, right? And so it's beautiful to see that we would hear stories about, hey, I got promoted, hey, I took this role up, even though I'm the first woman to be playing this role in my organization. I quit my workplace because I realized that it was toxic. And so I think women were feeling brave to make these choices and were acting on the ambitions that they had created for themselves. I think what was, I would say, what was even more meaningful and long-standing was the changes that we were seeing in other spheres of life. Because this was, of course, a program for working women. And yet, like we say, any change that happens across our areas of our life. And often it's hardest when you've got to make a change and you have to apply it at home, let's say with people who have a deep impact on us, right? And people and our participants were coming back, our alumni were coming back and saying that, hey, I've been having different conversations with my children. I've been having different conversations with my mom on her life being different, on my life being different. And I think that's been beautiful to see what it shapes and impacts these women, not just in the workplace, but beyond workplaces at home. The last thing I'll say is that we do this exercise called the Wheel of Life with our participants and our alumni to get them to think about various areas of life. And apart from getting promoted and having brave conversations at home, I think the percentage of women who've gotten a health checkup done proactively and are prioritizing that to play the long game is extremely, extremely inspiring for us. And if I were to pull all of this together, I think what we're learning is that across all of these women, what's beautiful is that they're being more comfortable in their own leadership style. It's not like there are 118 people saying and doing the same things. They're all finding their own styles and rhythms to operate at a certain level of effectiveness. They're able to dream and aspire for opportunities, and then some of them are really killing it with bringing it alive already. And last but not the least, the beautiful tribe that's getting created where people are like, you know what, I don't have to do it alone. Can I ask for help? And I think that's beautiful because we're seeing these women help each other within the organizations. They're doing this for younger women in their organizations. They're doing this for their participants from other organizations. And this tribe of women really coming together to say, hey, I'm rooting for you, and together we're going to go places, is what we're beginning to see.
Absolutely, indeed. Very well said. Thank you, Anu and Archana, for sharing your deep insights and perspective on a variety of issues, ranging from women leadership in the social sector and how to smash patriarchy, first at home and then across the workspace, and how it is important to celebrate women leaders and also enable institutional change across India's corporate landscape to empower women with more leadership roles. And DEI should move beyond just being a lip service. Thank you so much for dropping by and taking the time out to have this conversation with us.
Thank you. Our pleasure.
Thank you, Gaurav.